Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Tonight, we have a special guest. We don't have too many guests on these days. I try to do better at that, but, it just is what it is. And instead of just having Anthony, who did function as a pretty good guest last week with the Presbyterian issues, because he understands that a lot better than me, so he functioned as a guest. But today we have a guest. His name is Jeremy R. Carl, not to be confused with the Jeremy Carl you probably are more familiar with and clicked on this for, maybe. I don't know. But he is a very forward-thinking younger man than me, and he's probably one of the, if there's a top 10 of people that are responsible for sinking Vivek Ramaswamy, he might be on that. I might also be on that because I made a meme that completely roasts him, and that you might be seeing the comment section just undermining him with the Indian guy. Well, he's actually Sri Lankan in the meme, but it doesn't make a difference. But so I made a meme that sinks Vivek Ramaswamy really well, but he roasted him in a Q&A session and got a little viral from that. You're coming in from Montana, I believe.
Yes, sir.
And great state, big sky state. Very hard to for me to operate my business in that state just because it's just big. And but anyway, welcome aboard. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you?
Doing all right. And so one of the reasons why I want to have you on to discuss this topic is because you're one of the only people that's actually kind of discussing this topic. And, one of the things that I think is the biggest threat facing the church is, I think, the impending financial crisis that the church is going to be facing. You talk about foreign missions and whether we're prioritizing that too much. So that's definitely caught my attention. You also wrote an article over at American Reformer that discusses churches and men and the disparity between that, or the not, they're not reaching young men the way that they should be and stuff like that. So we're going to talk about a lot, but I think the first place that I want to start out with is the drama, the culture of the day, and that is the discourse regarding the conversion of, the former Ho conversion story, which I wrote an article about and forgot to publish at 7 o'clock this morning. So it's going to be on tomorrow's newsletter. But I wrote about that, and this is the tweet that kind of got millions of views. It is insane how viral this went in the backdrop, because just looking on X, it got 35 million views for
Wow.
this testimony of Trevor Shiatz, who's a bit of a social media guru that works behind certain Christian channels and stuff like that. So, yeah, this has been an ongoing debate, and maybe I had a more hostile reaction because he responded to my post, which I made on this, and all I got to say in response to him is you quote tweeted Tom Buck, who is trying to rehash the haughty virgin versus the reformed horror discourse that's been going on for about a year. So that's kind of my take on that, because context is what frames this. But this guy gave a very lengthy, not a little bit TMI in a certain way, but it has been a public testimony for a number of years, and in which he kind of says, maybe I just read some of the cliff notes of it, but I kind of got to zoom in a little bit. He says, my wife was formerly promiscuous. I was a virgin. She was then radically born again, committed to church, evangelized constantly, Puritan books in her bedroom, prayer journals, grief over past sexual sin, etc. We got to know each other well over a year, dated 4 months, engaged 2.5. Wait, what? Oh, 2.5 months. Okay.
Okay.
No way, that's years. And didn't sexually sin with one another. Our first kiss with each other was at the altar on our wedding day. Reaction pic attached. That's a little cute, except for the reaction pic that is. But I don't get that. Like, that's a thing in the church. So it's like, we're not going to kiss until our wedding. I'm like, I don't know. I was never like that. But I have seen and know people who are like that. And like, wow. Okay, good for you guys. But this is someone who posted this testimony, and then he said she's more pure than most virgins, and as biblical purity is less to do with past sins, though they could certainly matter, and more to do with one's current posture of heart and daily decisions that honor the Lord. So he said a lot of things here that went viral, got 35 million views, which is
That's
insane
insane.
for this type of testimony, because it got a lot of people talking, got the manosphere talking, a lot of people saying, hey, you shouldn't throw your wife under the bus like that, or you're just using this story for social media clout, or you had the other people that celebrated it as a beautiful story, and to some degree there is some beauty to the story. A lot of people, but all of this comes at the backdrop, in my opinion, of a debate of kind of shame young men into, for having scruples in marriage and stuff like that. And that's kind of where I think if he had just posted this on its own, but instead it is quoting Tom Buck, who's uh, white knighting and stuff like that, which is very typical of Tom Buck, because after all, if you know his history with Karen Swallow Prior and stuff like that. Long history of white knighting with him, but I'll open the floor to you. What's your take on this as a younger man than me, as someone who, I don't know if you're married or not, but
Yeah, no, I'm not married. I am single, but I think it's definitely a mixed issue. There's two sides to it. Where I mean, there's absolutely an element of truth in the fact that a formerly promiscuous woman can be redeemed. Um, However, the fact that she is formerly promiscuous doesn't change anything, or doesn't change. She's not a virgin just because she is saved. But I think there's issues with calling this much attention to it and making it such a big thing of like, wow, look at how great this is. Like, yes, this is great. We absolutely want all whores to repent, and believe the gospel. But if you're calling attention to this and like we're making a big effort of virtue signaling and white knighting, oh, these people are redeemed, and so better than most virgins, whatever, all these kinds of things. You're encouraging that behavior, or at the very least, not doing anything to discourage that behavior. It kind of is going to encourage the mindset among people of, well, like you can sin, but Christ will forgive your sins, and everything's going to be okay. And the other take on this is, the effect of we kind of see it as feminization in the church. We are seeing this standard is applied to women, but it's not applied to men. You don't see a bunch of people. I forget, somebody tweeted this. I'm totally stealing it from them. I forget who said it, but they said, I don't see anybody out here asking women to go marry formerly sodomite men. And so,
well, maybe not sodomite, but Doug Wilson did marry someone to a pedophile, or former pedophile, but who might have like relapsed. But anyway, there
yeah,
is some
right.
examples of that, and it's interesting because you bring up, a counterexample. If the roles were reversed, which is usually a bad argument, but there is something to it that, uh, someone was, say, in jail for CP, and then came out of that, completely, believe the testimony and stuff like that. There'd be a lot of women that would understandably have scruples about not including that man in their theoretical dating pool, even if they are born again, saved, and all that. There's just
Yeah,
something that comes with being on a registry that kind of makes, you know, the situation untenable.
yeah, absolutely. Certain people are more vulnerable to certain sins, and so somebody who's lived a life of promiscuity is actually more likely, even if they're born again, to fall into the sin of promiscuity as opposed to other sins. And so we just have to be cautious and conscientious of that. The other thing I'd say about this is there's no need to be encouraging young men to act like it. Nobody's actually asking this, but this is the way it feels, where it's like, go out of your way to find a formerly promiscuous woman because she's redeemed, and isn't that beautiful, and wouldn't that be a good saintly thing to do for you as a Christian? Well, no, I mean, there are plenty of good virgin women who are great Christians out there. So I just think it's a dangerous message to be discussing heavily and encouraging heavily, while there isn't necessarily something untrue about it.
Right. And that's kind of what it's being framed as, because they're talking about young men. Well, usually a formerly promiscuous woman would probably be pushing 30, give or take. The born again virgin craze usually happens when women are approaching later childbearing years and kind of want to settle down because they realize, hey, I got a limited window left. It's time to pick a man and stick with that. I finally learned my lesson. But it is what it is, but it's being framed as, young men need to choose this and stuff like that, even though they're, it's not like it almost operates with the assumption that all young women are sluts and stuff like that, which isn't true either.
Mhm.
So there's a lot going on here. I do think it's, more women are uh, sexually promiscuous than men are, because there's kind of like a ratio 80-20 for men, but for women
Mhm.
I think it's more, I don't know, 60-40, I don't know.
Yeah.
But so there's a little bit of that, but at the same time, uh, oftentimes we're seeing that the young men are being shamed for having scruples, while the women are not necessarily held accountable for their sins. And how compelling are these testimonies actually? The Nala Ray, the Nala Ray testimony is not compelling whatsoever, because it is, I had lots of sex, I made lots of money, and now I'm saved. It's like, how does that not just glamorize, prodigality, which is a word I tweeted and didn't know if that was a real word or not, but it accepted it, because usually you don't have to turn that into a noun. But how does that not glamorize that? And that's kind of the struggle that we need to balance. Like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of women that have done this, but if the woman's just repenting of sleeping with her ex-boyfriend of 3 years versus body count of 30, you know, the sin's the same, but one gets more elevated and celebrated than the other.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, in terms of Nala Ray and other similar characters, and also actually, this guy's wife, they all are publicly, like, online about their past, and in fact, a lot of the time, like, in terms of Nala Ray, right, her entire, like, celebrity personality is built off of, "Well, I was once a harlot, and now I'm saved," and it's like, well, that's great, but is that, you have this platform that's actually still entirely based, the basis of it is still entirely, I once had this promiscuous lifestyle. And so I think that I said this with Nicki Minaj, or however you say her name, when she was like doing her whole big like conservative Christian thing. I'm like, this is great, if you're born again, but like maybe you like log off, delete all your music. Like you don't have an outwardly Christian presentation here. So you need to, like, if you want to become an influencer, change what the base of that influence is, and actually make the Christian statement, which is to completely kill your own body, your own past, kill your own
Die
the
to
body of your
yourself.
past. Right, exactly. Die to yourself, and be born again with Christ. Not look at how I can make an online personality about my past.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's not going on when you use your OnlyFans name as your brand moving forward as a Christian. Because
Mm,
let's be real, her not actual name's not Nala Ray, but that's her name, and she's like a very prominent example, because she was someone. Yeah, I'm just gonna give people warning. Yeah, don't, you can't even look her up without just stumbling across things that you don't want to stumble across,
mm,
because that's how prominent she was, and I guess that's how maybe because she's a claiming to be a Christian, like bad people are trying to soil that and all that, which yeah, that's bad. Don't do that. But here's the thing. Her husband has now seen that, or he was watching when they met and dated and lied about it. But either way, he has now seen it, and he confessed. And I did a video on this about unprompted. He confessed that this was a difficulty in their sex life and their marriage. And men, I don't know how to deal with that. That's not my situation. I'm married, have no relation to that issue, but this is something that there's no book about, there's no coaching for that. Like, can't relate to that issue, and a lot of men can't. But the people who are kind of pushing this, oh, she's marriageable, you should marry her, like, they don't understand the issue that you could face with that. Um, Obviously, the other example is Josh Harris, who wrote I Kiss Dating Goodbye. He wrote the book on Christian dating and tried to be pretentious and calling it courtship instead, even though it's the same thing. But he thought he could turn a formerly promiscuous woman into a housewife, the hoe into the housewife thing, and it did not work. and she was very obsessed over her ex-boyfriend who gave her a ring or whatever and stuff like that. That became an issue. Then she's lusting after other men on her honeymoon, and that obviously ended in disaster. Their marriage did, and also their, professions of Christ. They both apostatized publicly, very publicly, and tried to monetize that. So it's a very bad situation. But those are two situations that I don't think. First you have the one guy who thought he knew better than conventional wisdom and wrote a book, and you know it ended horrendously, because I believe he wrote "I Kissed Dating Goodbye" before being married, or maybe, or something. But very, yeah, he it's not like he has decades of experience being married when he wrote that book. And then uh, the person who did marry the promiscuous woman, who has certain struggles because of how public her promiscuity was.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I'm not too familiar with that story, but I think I've heard bits and
You didn't
pieces.
you weren't around in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's but I feel like I've heard about it from somebody before, just that, like, somebody writing a whole book about Christian dating and then apostatizing and their relationship totally failing. So, yeah, I mean, beware, right? Beware of these people that want to do the home to housewife. I like that. I haven't heard that before.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, I watched a lot of black comedy growing up, so, it comes out of me. I'm very familiar with Dave Chappelle and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Love me some Eddie Murphy. Um, but anyway, but that's just like the discourse, especially I think, people like Tom Buck were kind of milking that in a bad direction. And then, uh, anyway, this kind of brings us into the church and young men. What is going on with young men and the church in general? Just kind of give us the high level picture, and then we can kind of zoom in on some different things. But just super high level, like what do you think is going on? Do you think there's a bro revival, or if there is a bro revival, who's the beneficiary of that? Um, Floor is yours, I guess, to give an opener.
Yeah, I mean, I think the evangelical church, has largely just disenfranchised young men in a lot of different ways. I mean, this, once again, is like the first great example. We see a great feminization. We see, just moving away, not focusing on women's sins at all, even pretending like they're sinless. Um, we see modern liturgical styles, modern worship styles, which I think often disenfranchise young men, and that's led a lot of young men to swimming the Tiber, or converting to Eastern Orthodoxy, and I think that's discouraging to see as well. Um, and so I just think that young men, they feel like they don't really have a place in this modern church because they're given no purpose, no traditional masculine role. And I think it's really dangerous to disenfranchise that group because young men, are the next leaders, the next politicians, the next business owners, the next pastors, and we want to have the best of the best to fill those roles. Um, and so to disenfranchise young men, is a huge problem. And so I think that just the great feminization of the church, you can't speak out against it in your local church community in a lot of these places, because you'll kind of be shunned and shrugged off if you do. I've personally experienced that in the PCA. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's the issue we have. And the church needs to respond to that by reverting to tradition, and encouraging masculinity, uh, and stepping away from egalitarianism and moving towards traditional God-given gender roles.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, because you
Yeah.
definitely brought up things like liturgy. Young men are probably seeking tradition because they've seen, a very rootless society and what that entails.
Mhm.
So there's sort of a ebb and flow of reverting back to tradition after, rejecting tradition. A little bit cyclical, but obviously, long span of history. Yeah, this stuff happens. And one of the things I think you brought up, you definitely brought it up in the American Reformer, was music and worship style. Uh, and I do wonder, because here's the thing. At one point in time, like, it's almost like mega churches, like your local suburban mega church is actually like is giving society baby food, and then those people graduate from that and go into a more theologically sound, orthodox, and liturgical even church. And I just wanted to comment on that, get your thoughts on that pipeline, because I've definitely experienced a little bit of that. Um, and know other people who have experienced that. Like, there's a number of people in my church that used to go to the megachurch down the street. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Like, you think megachurches serve any role in giving the spiritual milk to the people that need it, and then those people graduate and become very productive members in other churches? What are your thoughts on that
Yeah.
theory?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, like, the mega churches are effective at getting people in the door, but I think they can give a lot of like misconceptions as to what the Christian faith is and what Christ commands for us. To somebody who's like that's their first interaction with the church, I think it's pretty concerning. Just because there's a lot of things that are just never discussed there. The sermon is kind of the same every Sunday, where it's like you sinned all week, but grace is gonna make you okay, which is true. And then sing two more Bethel songs and we're onto another week of sin. And I just don't think that's the gospel, really. That's like one sliver of it. Um,
You know what
and
my
so,
biggest problem with megachurch preaching was is it just didn't stand on business when preaching God's word. It's like, no, this is what the word says. You don't have to like qualify with I think it says, or the Bible is trying to say this, or like they always qualified what the Bible plainly states. And
mhm,
it's like just preach authoritatively
yeah,
on scripture. I mean,
yeah,
don't do it as Jesus did, because Jesus, when he taught on scripture, and it says, and they were amazed by how he taught, because Jesus is teaching from the perspective of God. That's probably why they were amazed.
mhm.
But these a lot of the megachurch pastors they just kind of weasel around, and they just don't confidently preach the truth of God's word in my experience. And that's one of the frustrations with it. Even if a lot of the other frustration is it's not deep. So, spiritual milk, but some people need that, but
Yeah,
they
and
don't
it
preach authoritatively.
absolutely, and it does function as a baby food. And in terms of that pipeline, to be honest, I haven't seen that. We have a handful of those like suburban mega churches as you described them, which is I think a perfect description. In Bozeman, the city where I live, we have like two or three of them with I think attendances like breaking 1,000 every Sunday. Uh, and I honestly only know a handful of people that have kind of moved down the pipeline into like PCA style churches. We honestly don't have too many of those in Bozeman, so there's only so many. I know one person pretty close with somebody who was at that church and then went to a conservative Lutheran church because they had a baby, and they wanted to baptize the infant, and then they decided there weren't enough young people there, so they went back to the evangelical megachurch. Um, and so I just think I see that pipeline honestly leading more to Catholicism because honestly, what a lot of the swimming the Tiber is what we're seeing with a lot of that is like people who are unhappy with like their local megachurch. They grow more sanctified and they're like, man, this really isn't like an acceptable experience for like what church should be. This isn't what the Bible lays out for what God's teaching is. And the only other option they see, you're either going to be like a super modern Protestant or Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. And it's like those are the two options, and it's kind of a rejection of they just don't. Nobody knows about classical Protestantism. It kind of exists in its own like little world, and so I honestly see the pipeline feeding more between those two churches. But yeah,
I can honestly only say I've met one person who converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, and he did it before it was a trend. Like, we're
uh-huh.
talking 2015, 2016, long after I knew him. So maybe that's about it, but I don't know why. But I don't know. But I don't see Eastern Orthodoxy as a long term like threat to evangelicalism, because first of
No,
all, it's super foreign. As Stephen Wolf says, all the girls look like Zendaya, so that's not it. We're not threatened. And then uh, also, here's the thing: Eastern Orthodoxy didn't stand up to Islam or Judaism, and I
mhm,
think they're very weak on the Islam question, especially. So that's just I don't think they're particularly strong in apologetics against Islam, which evangelicals, the lone bulwark stands. So I do
right,
think statistically, it just stands on every single issue is the same. Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, you're going to find out that they're not very based.
yeah,
Like, it is something that they say online to recruit people. And if I wanted to get a lot of subscribers overnight, I could convert to Catholicism. Or sorry, no, I'm skipping ahead. I gotta say I'm exploring the issue. And then I've now decided the issue. I'm going to swim the Tiber, and you just milk that process for content, like so many creators have done, like
Mhm.
Cameron Bertuzzi and all that. But uh, maybe there's a little bit of clout chasing. I don't know how much data there is to back a conversion of young people to Catholicism without the third world migration element to it, as far as like the youth. Well, are the youth converting, or are there more Mexican kids in America that are inflating the Catholic numbers? So I don't know which is really accurate.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it, and I only recently have kind of met some of the people from our local Eastern Orthodox. Is it parish? I don't know, I guess parish. I think what's funny is also a lot of those people really have no idea what, like, the Eastern Orthodox Church really is. They don't really know about the Filioque way, or, like, why the Eastern Orthodox Church even exists. They don't realize that it's, like, split into, like, 6 different sects or whatever. Like, the guy that everybody loves that's like, "Oh, based Mari Emanuel." I don't know if you've seen him. He was, like, getting super viral on YouTube and Instagram and everything, like, a couple of years ago, and he was a guy who kinda made Orthodoxy cool, but he's, like, Assyrian Orthodox or something and has, like, some super questionable, like, arguably heretical beliefs. And so it's like, I agree, like, the apologetics really aren't there. Their only apologetics are like megachurch, laser lights, smoke machine, fake and gay, come be based and traditional in the Eastern Orthodox Church with incense and patriarchs. But like, yeah, in terms of like actually how they vote, they're not super conservative. Their countries, they're very like Eastern, obviously, and so they're a foreign influence here in America.
Yeah, and
And so yeah.
Eastern Orthodoxy does not encourage religiosity. So like church attendance is kind of super optional, and I feel like a lot of people
Mhm.
who convert to Roman Catholicism really don't want accountability. I can name a couple influencers that might apply to, but what was it? The one hillbilly girl, I think, totally is not someone who's into church discipline or
Mhm.
being held accountable in a church. And I think in the Catholic Church, you're only accountable for the sins that you confess to.
Yeah,
Obviously, that's not doctrinally true. I'm just speaking
right,
functionally,
practically.
but in day to day, faith matters, and uh, that's I think kind of how it works. Or even people like Nick Fuentes who glamorize Catholicism, as far as what he said about his going to church and how he might go to different churches to avoid being public, which I understand why he would have to do that, but it's not really, other than the Eucharist, he's not actually really participating in a church body that I think Protestantism and even, dare I say, the Mormons also offer in terms of community and stuff. So,
Yeah, and it's weird too because I've been to a handful of Catholic masses, not because I'm interested in converting at all, but I just have a friend who is Catholic, and after I go to my church's Christmas mass, I'll go to their like midnight mass. Or I say my church's Christmas mass, my church's Christmas service. I'll go to their midnight mass. And you like show up and nobody's like talking. You're like your average evangelical or Protestant church, like everybody's like really friendly, you know everybody's name, you're chatting up a bunch. It's like you walk in, you sit in your pew, you talk to the person you came with or the people you came with for 10 minutes. The service starts. It's like super unpersonal. You don't know anybody there. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't know anybody, but my friend who goes every Sunday also doesn't know anybody there because there's like 10 different service times every single day. Um, and then the service ends or the mass ends and everybody just walks out and there's no like community really. So yeah, you definitely lose that accountability. Unfortunately though, I still think that a lot of men actually really like that. They kind of find it way easier. It also kind of it goes back to baby food the same way the mega churches do, where if nobody really knows who you are, it's kind of easy to just like show up to mass and be like, oh, I'm a base trad Catholic. But you're really not involved in your church at all. And also like the relationship with the priests are a lot less personal because they're just this seen as this like very like holy figure as opposed to like a guy in your church who is worthy of respect and really intelligent. It's like, oh, this is like the priest. He's like an agent of the Pope who is given the authority to like create God's law. And so there's like you lose a lot of accountability between all those things. So yeah.
yeah, I don't think you're wrong about that. And kind of full circle back to a megachurch in a way, because in
Mhm,
megachurches, it's the same way. You
mhm,
don't really know the pastor, or they're kind of like an unattainable figure. Uh, and one person who did really well to kind of mitigate that was John MacArthur, who would, stand and shake people's hands at the end of
mhm.
a service or whatever. So he was better at that. Their church was better at that because they even practiced church discipline in a mega church, which again, a lot of regular churches don't even practice church discipline. But this is actually one of the things that you say, you wanted pastors to call out men and the sins of men, which kind of brings a couple examples to mind because we've seen things like, because you kind of lean more in a way of harder shepherding than like normal shepherding. It made me think of apologia and their hard shepherding practices, or what are your thoughts on like shepherding and how hard should it be? Because you definitely have written along the lines of like there needs to be more of an engaged community that holds each other accountable and more camaraderie. That seems to be part of your prescription for a solution to the church. Can you kind of flesh that out a little bit more in terms of how that would look practically?
Yeah, I know a handful of men at my church. I say a handful, really just a couple of men at my church who are within, 10, 15 years of my age. One of them is like, 8 months older than me, and he's, just actually recently been engaged. He's getting married this July. And then another guy, who I'm very close with, who is in his young to mid 30s, early to mid 30s, and he has, I think his third kid is on the way, and he's happily married, providing for his family well. His wife's stay-at-home mom, and so I want to see people like that are in the church come and shepherd, but also discipline younger men that are in their teens, maybe still in high school, early on in college, that want that life for themselves, as Christians should. Christians should want to have a family. They should want to get married, and they should want to be the leader of their home. It's a blessing to be able to have a stay at home wife, to take care of your children. And so, just for those men in the church to take time to do whatever they deem necessary to help younger men also achieve that lifestyle. And these two men that I'm just referencing in my church absolutely do that for me. But it's rare. In fact, there aren't even that many people that fit that description of getting married young, starting a family, and a lot of them that do are kind of just like so focused on that they're not there to help the younger men kind of follow that same path. And so, in terms of like shepherding strictly, like if they see a young man making bad decisions, listening to bad influences, whatever it is, um, put their foot down and say, "Hey, you're a young man. Okay, this is what's expected of you. This is how you should behave. This is what the Bible commands. This is the life that you need to be living, whatever that might be. So listen to me, like what you're doing is wrong." And obviously not like marriage and kids isn't for everybody. The Bible clearly states that. And so maybe wouldn't always look like the man who's married young. Maybe it's the man who's really happy and successful and as a single guy, and he's like 50. He's lived that whole life as a just to serve God to his best, not serving his wife or not serving a wife at all, because that's not a distraction for him. And so whatever it would be look like, just those men reaching out to the younger men in the church and being the Paul to their Timothy.
Right. Now, a lot of there are some pastors that have kind of made a brand out of speaking to young men. Mark Driscoll comes to mind, and one of the things that he said that I think was right, so I think it was like get a job, ask a girl out, get married, and stuff like that. So he had a lot of statements like that. But then he also like hates on video games and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of like boomer takes on video games. What are your thoughts on a lot of these pastors who are kind of reaching out to men and specifically the video game? I'd love to hear your take on pastors coming down on that, uh, stuff like that.
I mean, yeah, I like a lot of the influences. I'm not too. I know who Mark Driscoll is, obviously. I don't listen to him really. He's a bit too like modern for my taste, just in terms of his style. But I do appreciate a lot of the attempts that pastors have made, even though it's a little more online, to reach out to young men. I love guys in Ogden, especially. I
Yeah.
think they do a really good job ministering to young men. I think there are some people within the CREC who do a good job with that. I don't know if that is something you'd agree with, but
They're
um,
just not as big in the platform, right? You know,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah,
sure. But, like, the people in Ogden, I think, do a great job at that. J. Chase Davis would be a name that comes to mind, who I really like a lot of the stuff he's done to reach out to young men. And I've talked to them personally about this, and, I like him a lot. And so I I think that, there's some, like, good stuff, and there's some not so great stuff. We see that with, like, the whole thing that we just were talking about earlier. Um, and then in terms of, like, video games, like, I think it really just depends, like, where you are, how you're doing in your life. Like,
I think
it
there's
is like
people who are losers that play video games, and then normal people who play video games for fun. I think these are two
absolutely, yeah.
separate issues.
There's, like, the Reddit, Discord, like, just always constantly playing video games, doing nothing productive with their life because that's, like, their life,
Yeah.
as opposed to, like, a casual 30 minutes a day to just, like, be chill.
Yeah,
I
I mean, there's weeks where I don't play games, and then
Yeah.
there's like one day or 2 days in one week where I play a few hours. It's
Yeah,
like
and sometimes
it's
it's
hard.
fun to just do that with your friends. It's good bonding time with your friends. I just like I understand where the boomer types are coming from with their anger about that, because they just don't understand it. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I don't think it's, like, inherently sinful to, hop on a call with your friends when you get home from school or whatever, and play around a Brawl Stars or something. I don't know.
I don't
It's
even know what that one is.
it's a mobile game.
I know I'm so old.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's where I stand on it. It's just like, if you're wasting all your time doing that, then yeah, of course it's stupid. If you're, like, a total degenerate loser who's, like, obsessed and infatuated with video games, yeah, it's a problem. But if you have a
Yeah,
job, you're working a bunch, you're doing your role, it doesn't hurt to, do a
right.
little of that.
And that I think that should be the reasonable take, but so I guess the Mark Driscoll, that would upset Mark Driscoll. But we've talked about on the channel before. Gamergate led to great things politically and stuff like that. Like that awakened a lot of men. Uh, so a lot of these white knight pastors, I mentioned Tom Buck and Mark Driscoll. I think I would definitely put Mark Driscoll in the white knighting category now that he's defending female pastors. So do they care for young men, or is it more, or do they care? Is it something that they care more about is just not offending women? So do they not care for young men, or is it more that they care more about not offending young women?
I don't know. I think they care about being culturally acceptable. I think that's honestly what the biggest thing is. I think they realize that if you, like, suggest anything more than egalitarianism, or I guess maybe complementarianism, that you're going to be shunned by everybody, and all the intellectuals in New York aren't going to like you anymore, and your church is going to shrink. And so I think that's what it is. They want to be accepted by, like, mainstream people, because, like, if you say bold things, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. Like the Ogden guys, they have traded influence for truth. Like, they could be more influential. They could have a denomination that spans the entire country, but instead, like, they built their strong burrow, they dug in, um, and they stand on what they believe. And so I think the reason that we see, like, a lot of these, like, conservative, like, reaching out to men guys, shifting to the left, or not being as far right as we always thought they were. It's honestly just that they want to be accepted by normal society, which is super dangerous. The Bible warns about that. Don't be changed by the culture. Follow the word of God. And yet, we see people disobey that all the time, and that leads in. That's like the modernity of the church, and that's kind of what's pushing young men away. Is that same concept of, like, people don't want to stand on traditional Christian values. They want to be normal in society. They don't want it. Like, if you're, like, a kid who goes to church, you should stand out. You should be different from everybody else. But I think a lot of these people would rather have, the members of their church, the people that follow them, just be like normal guys who also go to church and have certain values. But that doesn't really, like, super change the way they live.
Yeah, you mentioned kids and stuff like that, and when I was growing up, honestly, this is probably my biggest hypothesis in terms of falling away versus not falling away, as far as kids leaving their parents' influence. When I grew up, just looking at my class of youth, and there's a lot of people my age in the church, specifically compared to like different years, but it was kind of like every other year. So The youth students who worshipped with the adults were the ones that had a better chance of sticking with Christianity than the ones that were just in youth group.
Mm.
Those ones kind of tend to deconstruct
Yeah.
or fall away. That's my observation. Is that also yours?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm actually still in high school. So my the kids that I know have
Are you allowed to be on here then?
I don't know that my dad's okay with it, so, but I mean, the people I know that I guess are like those youth group types, they haven't moved out yet, so they're not really at that stage of like choosing whether they go to church or not. But absolutely, like in terms of the decisions they make, if you're just part of like the church programming as opposed to Sunday morning service, there's a stark difference between um, those two types of kids. And so yeah, I mean, I noticed that, and I think it's obviously really important to be participating with the grown men of the church who have family, and who have families that they've started, and worshiping with all the saints, because I mean, children are part of that, absolutely part of God's covenant.
Yeah, I didn't attend youth group sermons until I was consistently able to drive separately to church and actually just stay for the extra uh, thing. So
Mhm.
I was
Yeah.
actually able to do both, but
Mhm.
a lot of people weren't, and I think there was a more lasting. I don't know. That's just the biggest thing. It's not homeschooled versus public school. It's did you worship with the adults or not,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
or did you just or was it just like a what's the word childcare program? Where you're
Yeah,
just kind of being
childcare or youth group or
yeah, you were just getting funneled through one program to the next, and then
exactly.
didn't know how to worship with the adults, and then and I kind of like what my church does. They've kind of sliced it in a way, like okay, like they don't have like youth group having a different sermon than the adult sermon and stuff like that. So I like what they've kind of split that because it's a lot of older people in the church, which we'll get to that issue in a second. So how do you think churches should evangelize their youth in general? Like, what do you think works? Especially since you are the youth. What is your kind of perspective on what works and what doesn't really work?
Yeah, I mean, definitely embrace tradition. I think, especially at least in terms of young men, we want to see something that is a statement that is countercultural. And being like the mega churches don't do that at all. They're very mainstream in their culture. They sing songs that are the only difference between um, the songs they sing and your average pop song is they replace the word like baby or girl with Jesus, same tune, same style, everything else is the same. The kind of like Jesus is my boyfriend is what people call it. So be countercultural because I think especially young men, if they're going to be part of a church by their own decision, they want to see something that they want to feel like they're a part of something that's different. And they absolutely should feel that way. They should be given a purpose. In terms of like outreach, social media definitely can't be overlooked. The fact of the matter is that kids are all over on social media. If it was X, that would be great because that seems to be where most of the really decent people post most of their content. But also on YouTube and Instagram, that's in reality where a lot of younger people are. And so learning how to interact with social media, which I think some people have done well, um, without like generating total like slop content. So yeah, I mean, social media and tradition, like being set apart, being holy, as Jesus commands of us, as God expects of us.
So one of the things that I think churches should kind of do to invest in their own evangelizing of the youth is I think that churches should actually get more involved in local in education, like homeschool co-ops or whatever. Like I think churches should actually do more of that because they have enough pulling together of resources, probably enough interest, stuff like that. So they have a lot of the basic ingredients to pull off a pretty killer homeschool program. And I think
Mm,
that that's kind of what churches should lean into in terms of educating and providing an alternative to uh, public school systems, which you're in Montana. You're not in Maryland where gender propaganda and stuff like that is in the curriculum and
mm,
you can hardly do anything about it. I live in the only county where the school board does push back on a lot of this stuff. Maybe two other counties, but still, like I live in one of the only counties that actually does meaningfully fight back against this stuff. But yeah, it is that bad in the state that I live in. So, and it's only getting worse. But that's kind of my opinion on that. I don't see sending them to public schools. Again, like I said, it's not the biggest factor. I think it was worshiping with the adults was the biggest factor. But
Mhm.
in terms of the fact that the public schools have gotten significantly worse, not necessarily because of the people, but because of the state and what is being coming down the pike and COVID and all that. I do think that churches should invest more in homeschooling and not. I guess one of the bigger issues that will play on is foreign missions. You've said a lot about foreign missions, and maybe there's an overemphasis. I gotta just ask up front. Have you like read Radical by David Platt, or is that not an?
I have not, no.
Okay, I was just wondering if that was any part of it. I didn't read that until like a few years ago when I read that, but I did when I was your age. I heard my parents complaining about that book, so I my parents were right about that for sure. But
Mhm.
that is a book that like put a huge emphasis on foreign missions and selling your wealth in order to feed an African child for a week and stuff like that. So uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and, that ties into the youth outreach, as we were talking about. It's like the reason a lot of these churches aren't doing things that, like, youth wanna get involved in, they have all this programming, right? There's youth group, there's whatever other group. There's something every single night often in a lot of these churches where it's some group, some Bible study, where a bunch of people get together and they do the exact same thing, and it's not really very filling in any way. Um, and you have to ask yourself, okay, well, when are the people of the church like going and doing stuff in their community, their city? Well, the answer to that is they don't. All the money that's spent on evangelizing and doing outreach, helping people in poverty, it's all done in Africa and in Asia. And none of it's really done in your local city, right? In my city, we have like one major company that does all the like welfare programs, like homeless shelter, um, food bank, soup kitchen, all that stuff. And they have a big pride flag hanging in their warehouse. I know that because I went to go volunteer at their thing one time, and I was just like, my church gives money to this place. Their church is in Bozeman. They give money to this place. They cooperate with this organization. They're worshiping sodomy, and we just like give money. We throw a bit of money at them, and we're like, oh, it's good. We'll be good. See, we're doing our good works in our community. I think a good way to like reach out to the youth is like create activities that feel purposeful. Like maybe we go and the youth group goes and volunteers at like local Habitat for Humanity or whatever, and we build houses, or I don't know, we go like do a food drive, and we hand out food to the homeless. I don't know, stuff like that. If we're so you're going to be so like focused on evangelizing to the poor, helping the poor, involve the youth in some way. That's a great way to have outreach. Is all this programming we have, and yet none of it actually pours back into the community. That's a great form of evangelism. Is people seeing your church's name out doing these good works. That's something
yeah,
that Mormons unfortunately do really well. That it seems every other type of Christian in America sucks at.
my church is actually very good at that,
That's good.
and it's one of the first things that I learned about, what makes my church different. Because I always had a vibe that I believe in the people at this church, and one of the things is that the church is very active in like the Section 8 community that's in the city that my church is in. So they're very active in that. And yeah, it is turning out tangible results where a lot of there. It took years of investment, but you are seeing people from that community come to church. You're seeing their kids come to the church, and the kids' behavior has improved
Mhm.
since coming to the church. So it's one of the things that I really like about my church is that they are doing a lot of these things. Uh, I think the church that I grew up with, we did like a homeless ministry in the winter months because that's kind of when they needed it more. So we did that one Saturday a month, and I think other churches would do different Saturdays at this place. But it was like there's a lot of that. That was in Baltimore, so
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that churches should be doing. But one thing that I have seen, and this is probably the smartest headline I've ever seen from Christianity Today, is that yeah, they wrote an article about how foreign missions is used to unify the church, and in kind of a way that you have no real unity, but you're just using foreign missions as a like a fig leaf to cover up how divided your church is. So
Mm,
using this as a blanket issue to kind of cover the cracks. And I'm like, that's actually a very good premise that they've observed. And I think that's very true of like the Southern Baptist Convention. Like the International Mission Board is the only thing holding that together because it is just a broken organization. And if it weren't for that blanket, people could see how bad, or that rug, people could see how messy it is, and the floor, the big hole in the floor and all. So I kind of see foreign missions doing a little bit of that because, in the Southern Baptist Convention specifically, there's the International Mission Board. You don't really know how successful, how effective their ministry is. You just don't.
y-
There's no real numbers. It's not like, oh, we planted this many churches in Africa and this many in Asia, and they're not really reporting numbers like that. It's more
mhm.
like we have this many missionaries versus last year. It's kind of weird, which I get it. It's hard to judge the effectiveness of international missionaries. Very
Yeah.
hard because it is often thankless. It is often slow process and stuff like that. Another thing my church does is support people that are on the ground already in places like Peru, and there is like an African one. I think it's in Kenya or something. Kenya, or I think East Africa. But so there's like two missionaries there, and the other missionary family we supported retired. So I don't know. I think we're looking for a new one, but I do like that. I do think that that model's better than let's just emphasize a mission trip, David Platt style, because this is kind of like what I think would work better for church planting in general is that we don't need more churches. We just need to support the good churches that are out there. If there's like a missional organization that subsidized churches in like Maine or New England, very unchurched area, stuff like that, it would
Mm,
be way more effective than the Southern Baptist Convention planting a church across the street from Southern Baptist Church.
yeah.
So
Y- Yeah, absolutely. And I think like I would love to see just more focus on the local community or even our country or your state that the church is in. Because honestly, is America even really in a place to be going and evangelizing to like Africa? Like, are we really that much more holy than them on average? Like, our church is really that much better than theirs? And you know,
let me
right.
just say, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm gonna brag on the United States for a second
Okay.
because as much as the church loves to bash, oh, the church in the West is so soft. The church in the West is so soft. There's real Christians being persecuted. It's like we're kind of the bankroll here. We're kind of also the most theologically developed.
Mhm.
Uh, there's places in Africa that worship Benny Hinn. Like that's a bad thing.
Right. And I
I
completely
don't
agree.
know if there's actually a real church growth movement in Iran. Like people say there is.
Mhm.
What's the data there?
Yeah, and I
But
completely agree, and I'm not trying to peddle the whole like, oh
right,
well, all the other Christians are so much better than you Christians in the West. But I just say
but
like as a whole, Western culture has like been it's fallen victim to a lot of things. Like for example, like a great example of this is like our whole gay pride, our LGBT pride thing movement. That's something that's like totally foreign to a lot of these places. And by injecting like a Western cell there, you are risking the fact of that kind of like evil sexual degeneracy to be spread to those places. Now, I'm not saying that we should just like completely hands up, like leave foreign missions behind, but I think that we need to work on like making America more reverent, strengthening our church here, planting more churches in America that are truly honoring God because there's so many cities across this country that don't have that.
I think the same
And
thing that applies, with replace, make instead of the North American Mission Board and church planning is like subsidized churches. Like, if the dollar goes farther in a lot of these third world countries, is like we just gave the missions there. Obviously, if they can be trusted with cash, right? That's kind of a biggie. But you give those places money, they could do a lot with it, and maybe we send some laborers to help them get set up and use it. But there's people on the ground in a lot of these places,
Mhm.
and we should equip them, subsidize them, pour money on them, or as I would like to say, astroturf the church in these places. Like,
Mhm.
credit to Doug Wilson and the Crack for astroturfing a church plant in Washington D.C. next to Capitol Hill. Like, credit
Mhm.
to them. I know a guy who goes there too.
Mhm.
So he raves about that church plant in Washington D.C.
Yeah,
So
I've heard good
credit to
things.
them for that. Like, astroturfing church plants apparently works. Like,
Mhm.
pour money on some churches and help, as water to help them grow here.
Yeah.
So that might be a more effective solution with money rather than trying to uh, start up.
Yeah,
Which,
absolutely. Yeah, and denominational unity. And what I mean by that is like cross denominational unity. I guess like I want to see different churches of different denominations, Presbyterians and Baptists. Hey, we already have a Reformed Baptist church in this country, in this city, or whatever. Like instead of you guys, like yes, there's major theological disagreements there, but it's just gonna be more effective if both the funds that are going to that are going to the same church as opposed to two separate churches, and the people that are there are working together as opposed to working to bring people to two different churches. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with that. I cannot hear you right now.
my bad. One of the
I,
things is that, I thought we'd rag on the boomers more than we actually have tonight. But one thing that the boomers do very well is that they're an extremely generous generation. They are an extremely generous generation. That is hard to say. Um, in their giving, like, they bankroll the church, and that's
mm,
just undeniable.
absolutely.
I see this in my church. In my church, I probably am above average, probably above the median in terms of tither, right? But like, I'm not coming close to funding the church on a weekly basis.
Hmm.
I guess there's enough people that cover, but there's some whales in my church that I don't know necessarily who they are, but there's some whales in my church, and they're older. And one of the things that just comes to my mind is, if once these people die and pass away, who's going to take up that mantle and fund the church? And that, maybe that's part of my personal mission in becoming rich. I want to become super rich. I'm not going to lie. It's not really going to be through evangelical dark web, but I own a business as my day job. So, you know, I want to become rich. And one of the reasons why is because, hey, church needs, in 10 years or 20 years, it's going to be up to me.
Hmm.
That's kind of how I view it. So, uh, that's just kind of a huge issue. Like, what does this mean for the future of, or even the present of church budgets?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge giving and tithing issue amongst the younger generation. I wasn't even really familiar with the concept of tithing till I was like 15 or something. Thankfully, before I got a job, and ever since I've got my first job, I've been tithing. All the income from that, and gifts from relatives, whatever it would be. But it's not really talked about very much. And it's also not talked about like the church needs money. We are so afraid of like talking about how the church actually sorry, it doesn't absolutely require money, but it's more effective with money. And if that's money is used well, it can be extremely effective if it has a lot of money. Um, and so I think that like it's something we need to talk about more. We need to encourage young people, teach them from a young age, like, oh, okay, here's a $10 gift for your birthday, whatever. You have an allowance, right? And you teach your child as they're growing up to tithe that. $1, who cares, right? Widow's mite, right? You're giving a significant amount of what you have, because yeah, we do have an impending financial crisis that's going to come if we don't teach a culture of like this is actually a strict discipline that is taught in the Bible that you need to do, and we can talk about that without becoming a prosperity gospel church, right? The
Yes.
church will do better if it has more money, um, and it will be able to do more local evangelism, local missions, foreign missions, and just be more impactful, build beautiful buildings. The church used to be the financial powerhouse of the countries that it was in. And then, FDR started taking all of our money from income tax, and people got really frugal about their giving. And they're like, well, I don't have any money anyways because the government's stealing it all. So that's, kind of a problem with it. And they say, oh, well, I don't really need to give money the church to do good works because the government's already doing good works. It's called welfare and foreign aid, right? All that good stuff that we
I think
love.
that killed a lot of mainline churches.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then the mega churches, one of the reasons why they're able to exist is it is probably true in all these mega churches that there's a ton of people that give zero, and 80% of the giving
Oh
is done by 20% of the congregants.
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
I would bet on that for like 90% of mega churches probably have that 80-20 split
yeah, I
in
think
their
that's right.
giving. But they have enough people that they can float that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like that's not a realistic thing for every church. And I think churches should avoid being mega churches because you lose a lot of valuable
Right.
things when you're a mega church. And so, if we're gonna if the only churches that financially can survive are mega churches, then we have a huge problem. And I would hate to like transition to a world where, pastors are unable to provide for their families, and because we can't like pay them a livable salary. Um, so I mean, yeah, there needs to be more talking about tithing, more talking about giving, being selfless with your money because it's an effective tool for the church. And we can talk about this stuff without being prosperity gospel. Everybody's so afraid of being Joel Osteen or whatever, but
Right.
money. The Bible talks about money. Jesus talked about money. Like these are
And
things.
that's what the prosperity gospel people get right is that yes, the Bible has so much practical wisdom on wealth. What
Hmm.
they get wrong is that they associate and make a test of wealth a test of salvation. Like if you really have faith, then you will automatically become rich. And I do think there is something true that God gives us the desires of our heart. I do think that that is broadly true. In a sometimes it's a judgment against us,
Mm,
but other times and that's to say that people don't actually want to be rich, they want to be comfortable.
mm,
And I
hmm.
think that's mainly the case in the prosperity gospel. But then you had the opposite end of that, which would be the poverty gospel. I think people like John Piper, David Platt is definitely a poverty gospel. He says you should determine how much money you absolutely need, draw a line, and anything above that you should be giving away, which
Hmm.
is financial folly. And that a lot of people followed that advice. Uh, and what was the discernible return on investment for all that money that they gave away above the line? I don't
Hmm.
know, but their kids do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and I think another issue with, like, the giving that we're seeing, is, like, when the church does talk about it, they don't really specify. The church should be the one asking, like, "Give your money to me, not because I'm gonna misuse it or pay myself more because we're gonna use it well." But I think a lot of Christians now, like, while seeking to do good works, will fund secular charities, and, like, secular charities do terrible things. When a charity does not have like the gospel behind it, it's going to do moronic things. Like, for example, our government welfare, USAID, like Elon Musk covered, I think it was like $50 million were being spent on condoms to like stop the spread of AIDS. Well, I mean, that's stupid. Like all the condoms in the
you really
world.
think they're going to use them?
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's $50
It's
million
a
of
balloon.
American taxpayer money being sent to go fund, um, you know, sex pretty much, right? And those aren't obviously like Christians willfully giving, but Christians will like see like what Mr. Beast is doing and be like, oh, what a good work, look at what he's doing for the kids in Africa. He's drilling wells of water. It's like, well, think about all the corruption, like all the things we're missing. He's doing it for a profit. He's got all these bad thoughts in his heart probably. And so like we also need to talk about like secular charity is actually not doing good works, and it's actually really inefficient, and there's lots of corruption. Like I trust the church. There's corruption in the church too, but I trust the church a million times more with my money than a secular charity. And also, the Bible tells us, good works can't be done apart from God. And so, these charities without God and these people without God that we're trusting to do our good works aren't actually doing good works at all. They're just doing things that appear to be good to worldly people.
Yeah, I gotta say, yeah, I don't really trust the secular charities that are like humanitarian charities, just a
Hmm.
whole lot, really.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think there's a point, I don't have a strict biblical position on tithing. I just tithe because it's a tradition. Like
Yeah, that's fair.
10% is traditional. I don't necessarily think that's a New Testament teaching. Uh, I just think it's a good number. It's a good tradition.
Yeah, fair enough.
And that's kind of my take on that. I do want to get to some of the chat questions because I'm sort of out of questions, and I've done a lot of
Yeah,
follow up as well.
great.
Nobody of importance to you for a $5 super chat. Thank you very much, man. Is it just me, or did this chastity conversation happen really suddenly? Really feel like the algorithm just started recommending these posts. Not really, really suddenly, but it is. It has the Reformed whore versus haughty virgin debate has entered the cycle of debates that happen in the online discourse. It is very cyclical. This online discourse, every 6 months or so,
Pops
we
up. Yeah.
have a different, a different discourse, or we'll have this discourse again in 6 months. So that is kind of how it works. Around every Easter, there's a Christ King discourse, which we've sort of already had, but we're maybe due for it again since Palm Sunday is coming up.
Mm,
uh so yeah, Christ King being anti-Semitic, you get ready for that discourse. uh Also around the spring, usually is right before ShepCon, we get a lot of John MacArthur discourse, but
mm,
now he's passed away. So a lot of cyclical discourses. We're probably due for the David Bathsheba discourse and whether he forcefully penetrated her, which the Bible clearly says he didn't. But she was bathing on a roof. Why is she doing that? But suspicious in my opinion. But anyway. Uh, the it is a cyclical divorce, or sorry, not divorce, cycle of
discourse.
discourse.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I don't know
absolutely.
if you had anything to add to that one.
No, I
I'll
mean,
look through
spot
some
on. It's
more
just it's
questions.
one of these things that we distract ourselves with every 5 months. So, yeah.
Let's see. I saw more questions. Here's another one. Ika's dating goodbye from Stormy Squad is a whole lot of nothing. I think there's a lot of truth to it. I didn't read that book. I had that book in front of me when I not in front of me, but there was a different book that I borrowed when I met my wife and started dating her. I think it was like Young and in Love or something like that. It was another one of those preppy books, but it did encourage young marriage, and I think that's another thing that we should encourage is young marriage. One of the movies that I think is very bad is God's Not Dead. Like I might have liked it when I was young and saw it for the first time. Didn't exactly inspire me into a world of apologetics, but it's like, oh, cool movie. And it made a lot of money. This is great. And then you kind of watch it as an adult and it's like, what sort of fantasy were they pushing where a couple that had been dating all through high school and plans on getting married after they graduate the same college together? Is like, what fantasy world are they living in where you can just wait that long and date that long and stuff like that? That is uh, absolute nonsense, and I think
Mm,
young marriage should be encouraged. Uh,
absolutely.
let's see. Looking for question marks. So send in your questions if you have them. Let's see. Can a non-denominational evangelical boy and a Roman Catholic girl really be in a relationship? I feel like you're not just asking for a friend here. Um,
I think he's doing
yeah,
the meme. I think he's doing the meme, like, with the cowboy hat, you know?
I don't know the meme, but
It's like a cowboy,
oh,
like, in
that
his truck.
sitting in
Like,
the truck. Okay, isn't that
yeah.
from Yellowstone or whatever?
I don't know.
But
I haven't watched Yellowstone,
I,
but
I, I haven't either because I don't watch woke television, network television. But anyway, good question. I don't know. I've never been in that situation. Is that
yeah. I know, like, Roman Catholics don't have rules about, like, dating outside of the faith, like, at all. Like, you can date, like, a Muslim, or marry a Muslim, which, I mean, I think is pretty clearly unbiblical, but,
and they
um
take marriage more seriously, or I don't want to say more seriously, but more seriously because they have like a spiritual marriage thing like Muslims do apparently. But
yeah, and
which
what I've
Protestant tradition doesn't recognize a distinction between spiritual and civil marriage.
mhm. What I've seen too is, it never in my life, when I've seen a Roman Catholic and a non or a Protestant get married, the Protestant always swims the Tiber. It's never the other way around. So, you know, you gotta be careful around that because it's I don't know if they're like the Mormons are like intentional about this. I swear they like deploy women as just like a form of evangelism. It's really
The
weird and messed
trap.
up. But you know what I mean? Like, have you seen that? Like,
There's not that many Mormons in Maryland.
okay, yeah, that
I've met
makes
a
sense. So
few, but
we have
there's
quite
not
a
that
few in
many.
Montana because we're kind of close to Idaho and Utah. You know, their heartlands. Um, but yeah, they're like into that, and I think I don't want to say Roman Catholics are doing it as intentionally as the Mormons, but there definitely is a little bit of that going
The
on.
Eastern Orthodox aren't. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Zing. But anyway, church's primary mission is to carry the gospel to the world. Part of that mission involves opposing sin in the community. If they don't believe themselves to sin, why look for a savior? And yeah, that's a huge issue in a lot of mega churches, a lot of churches, or even the the testimony discourse that we got into earlier.
hmm Yeah, and also in terms of, sorry, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Nope, you go.
In terms of like carrying the gospel of the world, this kind of a hot take and also like a bit unrealistic. I'm gonna have here in a second, but what I've found is that foreign missions have like a plateau of effectiveness. Like they can, church will reach a certain size or will do a certain amount of stuff and it'll kind of just stop. The most effective foreign mission in the history of the world was Hernan Cortez's conquest of the Americas. And like the European division of Africa. And what they did, we particularly see this with the Americas, is they kind of just said, hey, look, we don't care about your culture. We're going to build churches out of the ruins of your temples, right over them. And we're going to burn your idols, and it's going to be illegal to practice your faith. And I'm not advocating for all those things necessarily, but what I'd say is that imperialism and colonialism are effective at spreading the gospel. Now they have a lot of bad things. There's a lot of bad connotations that come along with those words. And obviously, like Hernan Cortez kind of needlessly killed a lot of people too. And so I'm not like
Well, if
absolutely.
you remember the story, they almost got completely annihilated in holding the capital city of the Aztecs. So they kind of did what they needed to do
Yeah, sure, and
to
it depends
survive.
because
But
there's so many like stories, and they're like, oh, well,
there
you
are a
can't.
lot of stories, but
Yeah,
like
right.
they got into a very precarious situation.
Absolutely. And Columbus's thing was like his, he found these people like the Carib tribe. They were like eating the babies of women that they raped, that they captured. So it's like, yeah, these people actually did need to be like dealt with. But anyways, my point is here is like, if we return to a point where like the political discourse would allow it and our economic situations would allow it, I don't think it's beyond us to say like to show up to Africa,
I
in
mean,
which there's
Trump does want to revive Manifest Destiny, and I think America is probably due for that. I think the international order is failing, and I think you're
yeah,
absolutely right. Colonialism was the one of the greatest advances of the gospel.
absolutely, yeah,
Roman Empire, when it flipped to Christianity, was one of the greatest
great example.
advances of the
Yep.
gospel when they flipped. And even the Catholic Church, to their credit, they had some good centuries where they cracked on Arianism and stuff like that. There's
hmm
not an Arian sect of the church because of
Because of the
uh,
Roman Catholics.
well, yeah, because of the Roman Catholics and them using the uh, empowering the state to deal with those
Yeah,
people.
right there. There were the Baltic Crusades where
Right.
they had that. Yeah.
Yeah, and people forget about the those crusades because they have a fancier name that I forget. It starts with an L or something. But
Oh yeah.
where they went to like Lithuania and
Yeah, the Baltic.
Estonia, and yeah,
Yeah.
they had a Livonian crusades or something like
Yes, there
that.
you go.
Yeah, there we
Spot on.
go.
Yeah, the Teutonic Order and all that. Yeah.
Yes. We are rich and in need of nothing. Follow that thought to the end. Revelation speaks of it. I think it is true. Is this Anglo? Is this the Anglo ceiling bird? Oh, I guess it's talking about that. Let's see. I think that's about it. That is about it for our questions. That's all I got for today. You can plug your stuff if you have anything.
Just on Twitter right now, CIK Jeremy Carl is my handle.
I will
Um,
add that to the description.
Perfect. Yeah, that's all I got right now. Yeah.
Awesome. If you like this kind of content, do also subscribe to the channel, the podcast, if you are new. Uh, my name's Ray. We have a Patreon-like system. You can support us if you want to get bonus content and stuff like that. But the least you can do is like and subscribe. That's new subs are the only thing that helps with the magical YouTube algorithms. Fact. But have a blessed day. Stay based. Christ is King, and we will catch you on the next one.